In the morning, dew still clinging to the grass, the flock spread out like shadows searching for food on the landslides. They did not know the names of the hills, did not call the seasons by words, but they could read the sky, when the birds changed direction, when the wind carried the scent of rain, when the moon was as thin as a claw, signaling the cold to come soon. They smashed rocks together, sparks as small as insects spreading their wings and then going out. Fire was finicky, it only stayed with the patient. After many days, the last pieces of rock finally emitted enough light to make the straw smoke. They bent close, breathed as if in prayer. And the fire this time was willing to be their friend. From then on, meals were no longer just about chewing and swallowing. Cooked meat made the stomach feel better, the mind clearer. Bones were broken to suck the marrow, a rich sweetness straight into the long nights. Fire also did another strange thing. It gathered people together. They sat closer together, shared food, changed tools, changed spontaneous sounds into rhythm, into music of hands tapping on hollow tree trunks. From rhythm, stories arose. From stories arose memories. And memories, like another kind of fire, began to know how to stay in the heads. But fire had its price. It demanded meals, demanded firewood, demanded someone to watch over it overnight. A young girl, eyes awake in the night, suddenly realized, when the fire burned, the animal's eyes grew closer. When the fire went out, silence poured in like water. She gathered more branches, stirred the coals, learned how to keep the fire small and durable, not wasteful. These secrets would later become the unspoken rules of the pack. Whoever watched the fire last night would be allowed to pick fruit by the stream today. Whoever let the fire go out would be guilty before the wind. One day it rained heavily. The fire shrank and then went out. The whole pack sat looking at the pile of coals as if looking at someone who had just left. They took shelter under the edge of the rock, endured the cold, chewed bitter root bark. When the rain stopped, the old men took 2 pieces of dry ice and persevered for hours. The fire returned like a stranger knocking on the door. This time they decided not to go empty-handed. The embers were wrapped in damp ash, carried like a child. So they could leave this place with a piece of day in their pockets. Then the big animals moved. In the distance, strange terrain appeared, cracked, then stretched out into wild steppes. They followed, learned to read footprints in the mud, measured the depth of puddles by sight. On the edge of a ravine they met another herd. The 2 herds looked at each other, backs straight, spears in hand, children huddled behind. Sometimes the fire made the braver than necessary. A shout, a spear thrown. But that afternoon was bloodless. The old men on both sides stepped forward, placing their exchange items on the ground. A thin stone blade, a smooth bone, some dried fruit. So there was a bargain. From the initial shaky exchanges, an invisible path was born. People from now on not only compete but also know how to share. At night, the sky almost falls, the stars are as dense as grains of rice that have not yet been invented. A boy looks at the sky, sees bright dots forming lines. Lines that will later be called constellations, then become maps for boat people, for nomads, for adventurers crossing the desert. But at the moment, it is just an intuition. There is also something up there talking to them with light. He mumbles incomprehensible syllables, perhaps a song learning to stand up. The long dry season causes small streams to shrink into opaque pools. They discover traces of stagnant water in crevices of rocks, learn to carry animal skins sewn into bags. Children are taught to play the game of finding shade at noon. That game, over thousands of generations, will become vital knowledge. The women found a strange mound, where the trees were thicker and the fruit was more abundant. They stayed a little longer, gathered firewood into piles, built simple wooden fences to keep out the animals. Staying a little longer, those 4 words would later blossom into villages and cities. One morning an unusually cold wind swept across the steppe. Birds flew low. In the distance, a bone-white patch crawled down from the edge of the sky. Ice. They did not know the word ice age, only that the earth had changed its mind. They wrapped their animal skins close to their bodies, marching in a line, their feet leaving faint trails in the mist. The fire was no longer a luxury. It was the common heartbeat of the herd. When someone stumbled, the next person reached out to catch them because no one wanted to leave behind a handful of coals in an ash bag. And so they went. The fire in the middle, the people around it, the wind and the animals on the outside. Along the way they learned to name the nameless thing with gestures, then out loud. Names turn nameless woods into places with small seeds, streams into singing waters, rocky fields into places where the wind hurts the face. And when things have names, they can be remembered. When remembered, they can be taught. At that moment, humanity begins to move beyond chance. At the end of the season they come to a valley with cliffs as red as embers. On them the young people use charcoal to draw handprints. Not to show off, just to make sure that we have passed here. But each hand imprinted on the stone is a silent oath, that from the warm ashes of a past night humanity will place its hands on many other walls, cave walls, city walls, walls of knowledge, and leave its mark and then move on. The wind from the north carried a strange cold, creeping through the valleys of chest-high grass. The long dry season shrank the familiar puddles to opaque mirrors. The great herds of animals migrated, leaving trails like threads stretched across the steppe. The people followed. Not out of curiosity but because hunger drove them from the familiar. They walked across stretches of land they had never set foot on. Sometimes it was hot white sand, sometimes cold gray rock like bone. Each step was a new lesson, finding shade under the canopy of ancient trees, digging holes in the ground to hold water, hunting strange animals whose names were only just being coined. Some days they went to the vast shore, not to see but to find food. Shells, land crabs, salty seaweed. The smell of salt clung to their hair, to their skin. Children played in the small waves, and then at night the fire was lit, the fish cooked, the grease dripping onto the embers crackling. Then the land changed again. The sea receded, revealing a strip of land connecting the two continents. They crossed, not knowing that humans would later call it a land bridge. Before them lay strange plains, the sky bluer but the wind as sharp as knives. They learned to sew animal skins into coats, tying them tightly around their wrists and ankles to keep them warm. The frost in the north made people shiver, but at the same time opened up new hunting grounds. In the snow, animal tracks were as clear as writing. They chased after them but also wary of wolves as big as horses. The cold night, they buried hot coals in sand pits to keep warm, then covered them with animal skins like a blanket. Wherever there was water, there were human tracks. A small group decided to stay near the strange river, because the land along the banks was fertile, the trees grew thick and fish swam abundantly. But the others continued on, drawn toward the horizon. The journey was not a romantic adventure. It was an instinct for new life. Every child born along the way was proof that the journey was not over. Then they met other strangers. Not the same voice but the same gestures. A hand extended a dry fruit in exchange for a thick skin. From these exchanges, people learned to see each other not only as competitors, but also as sources of life. Rain, wind, heat, cold, all of it was compressed into the flesh so that every time they looked back they saw only footprints erased by the wind. But in memory, there was a thread connecting, from the fire of the night before to new horizons, from the sound of stories told by red coals to the sound of waves crashing on strange shores. Before writing, human memory lived on words and signs. At night, around the fire, the elderly recounted hunts, rivers they had seen, mountains they had climbed. The voice was not just a source of entertainment, it was a thread that kept memories from falling into oblivion. Each story was an invisible map, guiding those who had never traveled far. Language grew from gestures. A hand drew a circle to speak of the sun, an index finger trembled when referring to giant game. Each sound became special, repeated many times, and then became a word. Words expanded the mind. They allowed people to speak of things they had not seen, to remember things they had lost. As the human herd settled longer in one place, rituals emerged. A successful kill was divided according to an unwritten rule, accompanied by a dance of celebration that lasted until dawn. Each season, when the herd left, they lit bigger fires, sang verses in memory of their ancestors, believing that their spirits would guide them. Death, which was simply a disappearance, began to be treated differently. The dead were no longer left on the grasslands, they were laid in holes in rocks or in soft soil, covered with leaves, sprinkled with coal, sometimes with objects left beside them. A spear, a necklace made from animal teeth, a few strangely shaped pebbles. Maybe for the dead to take with them, maybe for the living to remember that they had been here. Young hands practiced touching the rocks, carving lines symbolizing rain, animals, the sun. On the cave walls, the drawings not only told stories but also spoke of ways of looking at the world. From now on, the memory of the community was no longer just in the minds of the elderly, it was on the walls, in the dances, in the tombs, in the songs. The world had changed. It was no longer just a journey to find food, but also a journey to preserve oneself. The rainy season came late. Instead of chasing the animals, they noticed the seeds that fell near their homes, which grew into bushes a few months later, heavier. A hand picked them up, crushed them, mixed them with water, placed them near the fire, and flat cakes were born. From then on, they began to save the seeds instead of eating them all, digging holes and covering them with soil. Green shoots grew as promised. Gradually, they set up stakes as boundaries, channeled water from the river in small ditches. The water carried silt, the soil was soft and fertile. No longer having to travel far, they built houses of grass, mud, wood. At night, fires burned in front of the doors, the light a sign. This was a place for humans. The surplus food allowed them to do many other things. Pottery to hold water, coarse cloth woven from tree fibers, rice warehouses built on wooden poles to keep out rats. Harvest days became festivals. Drums, songs, dancing around the tall bundles of rice. And then trade blossomed. People brought salt from far away to exchange for pottery. People with red copper exchanged it for new seeds. Villages connected to villages into a network of trails. From there, the idea of borders emerged, and with it protection. Earthen walls, moats, spears. Graves were no longer mere hollows. They were raised mounds with stones arranged in circles, with flowers and elaborate burial objects. The dead carried jewelry, bronze mirrors, and pieces of dyed cloth. They believed that another place awaited them, and these objects would help them enter. Villages grew into towns and towns into cities. From a single grain of rice, humans planted roads leading to civilization. The sound of hammers striking bronze echoed like drums announcing a new season. Red metal flowed from the earthen furnace, poured into stone molds and cooled into blades and spearheads. Iron appeared later, hard and durable, allowing deeper plows, higher walls, and sharper weapons. People learned to combine earth, wood, and metal to build wheeled carts and ships to cross large rivers. Caravans traveled farther, carrying news, goods, and sometimes war. City-states were formed, each with its own laws and guardian gods. Temples were built, stone pillars carved with animals and the sun. Soldiers in bronze armor marched, brass trumpets blared. Along with wealth, conflict grew. Cities were besieged, gates were broken, walls stained with blood. But from there, art was born to record victories. Reliefs, murals, monuments. Wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of kings and nobles. But in the shadows, it was the craftsmen, farmers, and soldiers who kept society breathing. And the sound of the forging hammer continued to resonate, like the heartbeat of the Metal Age. The cobblestone streets stretched out like the veins of the empire. Soldiers marched day and night, carrying banners embroidered with the guardian angels. The great city stood tall with baths, arenas, and libraries filled with papyrus. Sages sat in the shadow of the pillars, preaching about justice, destiny, and the question, are men made to serve or to be free? In the squares, merchants from 3 continents traded gold for spices, silk, and glass. But the empire was not only about wealth, it was also about insatiable ambition. War expanded borders but also opened doors for other cultures to invade. Religion spread, bringing with it hope and new laws. When empires fell, the roads remained, leading to new cities, new hands to build and destroy. The human mind learned to ask questions about the soul, and, from then on, no longer satisfied with just one answer. As darkness receded, people began to seek new light. Artists painted human faces with their wrinkles and eyes, scientists turned telescopes to the sky. Great ships left port, crossing uncharted oceans. They brought back stories, plants, treasures, and even diseases. The printing press spread ideas faster than ever. Books were no longer the preserve of the aristocracy. Everyone could read, and when they learned to read, they asked questions. Religion, politics, science, all were debated. In the cities, music and knowledge mingled, and coffee houses became places to debate the future. People began to believe that their minds could change the world, and they did. The whistle of the train crackled in the morning. The iron wheels crunched on the rails, carrying goods and people farther than ever before. The city glowed with smoke from factory chimneys, the gears turning ceaselessly in the bellies of steam engines. The narrow streets were crowded with workers, their hands and faces stained with coal. At night, gas lamps lit the streets, replacing the familiar darkness. Letters crossed the ocean as fast as rumors, newspapers spread the news every morning. Progress came at a price. The rivers were black with smoke, new diseases crept through the slums. But the dream still ran along the tracks. The dream that machines would make life easier, that the world would be smaller within reach. The new century opened with the blue light of the screen. Invisible signals crossed the ocean, carrying images, sounds, and ideas instantly. Computers left the lab and entered homes, then shrank into devices that fit in pockets. The entire planet became a network of lights at night. People talked to each other from opposite ends of the world, sent greetings, signed contracts, fell in love, got angry, and broke up through screens. But speed also created new darkness, false information, invisible distance, and mental fatigue. Yet the world has never been so big and yet so close to the palm of your hand. Tomorrow has no shape, but its shadow is already cast on the present. Artificial intelligence learns to speak, listen, and create. Humans talk about returning to the moon, setting foot on Mars. Climate change forces us to change, floating cities, rooftop forests, wind and solar power. The lines between real and virtual are blurred, but the dream remains clear: to live longer, healthier, and not repeat the same mistakes. Perhaps one day our descendants will talk about today as we talk about the first fire, a beginning and an unfinished promise.